So good evening, everyone, and you're welcome to our webinar today. And today we have the honor of hosting Professor Charles Appiah-Addo, who wears many hats. His background is very varied and very interesting. And with a bachelor's degree, first class honors, bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and then an MSc degree in transportation engineering from the University of British Columbia, and then also a PhD in finance from the University of Washington in Seattle. And so this is somebody who's worked and who's learned across sectors. And in industry, he works in private equity and works as an analyst and a manager of a portfolio at Parametric Portfolio Associates in Seattle. And so he comes as a very decorated scholar with a lot of experience and insights, and somebody who's worked across industries in education. He brings all that into the classroom. So it'll be really interesting to hear his ideas when it comes to innovation in education. So thanks for joining us. And let me start by welcoming you, Prof. You're very welcome to tonight's program.
Thank you, AC. Thanks.
Wonderful. And one of the things that's very interesting, given the context that we're in, the global health challenges that we're facing, COVID-19, etc., SDG has actually exposed education as one of the areas where we have the deepest faults or the deepest cracks and challenges, and also one of the areas where we have the most opportunities to leapfrog, opportunities to do some amazing things. What do you think about that? How has our current context influenced education in terms of the opportunities it's thrown up at us and also the challenges that it's highlighted? Any comment on that as we get started?
Thank you, AC. Thank you for that introduction. I left some out, otherwise I would come across as somebody who has moved too much because I started at the Ghana Medical School. I left that out. I started at the medical school. I spent only a month there, so that really wasn't, it was just a short time. But yes, in 1979, I was the, the president of the first year medical students at Legon. And then I left there to KNUST, and as you will say, the rest is history. Now, I think you're right. We have a challenge on our hands, the COVID-19. But as people say, we cannot waste a good crisis. So this crisis affords us the opportunity to do what we knew always we had to do, but this is pushing us to do it. And that is really to innovate our education and to really leapfrog a lot of the developed countries, what they have done, to leapfrog and advance in education so that in a few years' time, Ghana will be positioned to be the true firstborn of Africa, to be the country that many of the African countries can learn from, so that many of our young people will have skilled jobs and our economy will grow. So that is really an opportunity that this COVID-19 has afforded us, and I think we need to seize that opportunity. Innovation. Technology will be key as we go on. You will see that the application of technology and actually changing some of the structures will be key to this advancement. Thank you.
Great. And so as we have this conversation about SDG number 4, and I think it would be great to reiterate what that says to all of us. And this is really about the importance of ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. And so there's the issue of inclusiveness, there's the issue of equity, and then good quality, top quality education and lifelong learning opportunities. Could you share with us your top 2 or 3 innovations in education that you find exciting as we work towards ensuring we meet the SDG number 4? Any innovations that excite you?
That's a good question. I wish we had an hour or two or more, but we will see what we can do with the time that we have. My top priority will be the use of technology across all levels of our education, beginning from kindergarten and going on to the tertiary education. I think that we don't have a choice. It's not an option. We need to embrace technology. We need to invest in technology the way we invested in roads and school buildings and so on. Right now, we need to invest in technology across the breadth of the land. That is my number one. That is application of technology across all levels of our education spectrum. That's number one. Number two, we need to change the structure of the progression in our education system. So far, it has been the case that when kids start school, most of them aim at university, going to the university to become engineers, doctors, pharmacists, lawyers, some liberal art holders. This has been the structure. That structure has to change. My innovation in that space is that 100% of the children who start school, and first of all, 100% of our children should start school. They should start kindergarten or first grade. But 100% of them should be productive elements in our society throughout their lives. And that talks about the lifelong learning and inclusiveness that you mentioned. And the way to do that is to ensure that all the children who start kindergarten will finish high school. So I support the idea that from primary school to junior high, there shouldn't be any exam that actually takes students from primary school to junior high. If there are exams, the exams should aim at identifying the weak students among us so that we can develop interventions to help those students to overcome the obstacles. Or the exams should aim at identifying the gifted students, the gifted children. So again, we can actually design programs to even enhance their gifts and make them useful to society. Those should be the aim of any exam, not to promote students or to set them back. So from kindergarten until they finish high school, all students should be able to go through the system. Okay. Now, after high school, now I'm going to introduce what I call the community technical vocational schools. These are 2-year universities that should dot the landscape of Ghana. In other words, every community should have access to a 2-year technical vocational school. Now, what are we going to do in these 2-year vocational technical schools? 2 things, okay? So the emphasis should be 2. Number 1, the vast majority of our children should aim at getting skills, getting certificates in carpentry, electrical work, building and road construction, plumbing work, air conditioning service, all aspects of skilled labor. In the middle level, you may look at it as a German model, where these students get certificate. We could call it diploma. In the United States, they may call it associate degree. So these students get it, and they also study entrepreneurship. So these are students who will form their own companies. They will know how to form companies. They will learn how to make dresses, dressmaking, how to process agricultural goods, and so on. So they can form their own companies. The vast majority of our students should aim at that. These 2-year technical vocational schools will also emphasize liberal arts so that the students who want to aim at going to a 4-year university in Cape Coast, in Kumasi, in Accra, in Winneba, will also get their associate degree and spend the last 2 years of their 4-year degree in these major universities. Now, if we do this well, what will happen is that every student who finishes high school will be productive. The vast majority of them will get their associate degree in technical skills and vocational skills will then use that to form companies and to be electrical workers, to be plumbers, to be carpenters. And what that means is when you're doing a building construction and you hire a carpenter, that carpenter will actually apply scientific methods. They will measure that this table has to be 2.3 meters and not about 2 meters. So that really, when you go to your finishing, I have built something in Accra. I have a house, and most of us do. You look at the finishing, and it's not very good. Because the people who are building, even though they are good, they are just using, they say, oh, it's about this, it's about that. Now, it's time to actually pursue excellence, where they measure and they say this is 2.4 meters or 5.3 inches. Okay, whatever it is, and they measure it and it fits perfectly. Tile work will fit perfectly. So the vast majority of the students will get degrees in that. Now, the rest will get their liberal arts and math classes and science classes and then transfer to the major universities. What that will do is it will lessen the burden, the infrastructural burden on the major universities, where right now you have over 50,000 students in Legon or in Kumasi or in Cape Coast, and the universities are overburdened. Okay. So those are my innovations. Now, you ask, now you think through this, you see that in order for this to work, I proposed, and really when the current administration came into power, I sent a 2-page suggestion through one of the ministers, one of the people. And I'm glad that the president, maybe he did it independently, but I'm glad nonetheless. There should be emphasis on French. French language, in addition to our English and our local Ghanaian languages, we should emphasize French at all levels of our education. Why am I saying that? Because this model that I'm proposing, where the vast majority of our students will get skills, right? They will be skilled. Ghana alone, the economy cannot absorb all of them. And so we should aim at equipping them with the requisite language of the surrounding countries, the countries surrounding Ghana, and they are English speaking and French speaking, with French speaking dominating. And therefore, it is really imperative for us to emphasize French as the second language in all our schools, so that those who finish can use that to then export themselves to the surrounding French-speaking countries.
Okay.
Right. So of course,
yes, thank you very much. I'd like to ask a follow-up question to your second point. So you mentioned 3 things: the application of technology, the changing the structure of progression in our educational system, and then community technical vocational schools. Now, I agree with you when it comes to the community technical vocational schools. My question though is, this is what the JHS and the SHS systems were designed to do. And so how do we make sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, rather than go backwards, look at junior high school, senior high school, and figure out how to deepen the experience and the training and the application of everything that you said, so that we don't necessarily need to wait until they're at the tertiary level to create that exposure to the vocation, the skills training, etc. What do we do at the junior levels rather than wait till they get into the tertiary levels?
I think that's a very good question. Thank you very much, Issy. That's a very good question. So at the junior level and the senior high school, we can introduce them to all the foundations, right? Math. They need algebra. If you're going to do carpentry work, you need to be able to add, to multiply, to divide, and to subtract. So all the students will need that foundation, whether they are going to be carpenters or they are going to be doctors or they're going to be engineers. They need that foundation. And so at the junior high school level and the senior high school level, the foundation should be laid in all these areas. Of course, there should be some courses that actually emphasize to a deeper extent some of these schools and some of these programs, some of these courses that they will do later on. But you see that if we are to actually sort of produce very highly skilled labor, whether it's in carpentry or whether it's in air conditioning. That kind of education cannot be adequately provided at the JHS level, because if you're going to do electrical work, you need to have some electricity background, and that level is too high for JHS. However, the beginning foundation in math and algebra and so on can be provided at the lower level.
All right, thank you. So in essence, we should start early and then we should strengthen or enhance the experience as they grow through the system. All right, with what we see around us, the different challenges, whether it's, we may talk about technology and the role that it plays in our educational system, but there are certain fundamentals that may not be there. Electricity, for example, having access to a computer, depending on your socioeconomic background and where you find yourself, data, access to data and all that. Where do we start from? Because there's the quality as a challenge. There's also the resources as a challenge. There's the infrastructure as a challenge. Where do we start from to be able to leverage technology, be innovative? And is this a policy issue? Is this a matter of just piloting it in 1 or 2 schools, see how things will go, and then scaling out? Is it a community-based effort? Where do we start from?
Again, good questions. Where there is a will, there is always a way. And I agree with you, you don't jump from 0 to 100. You move from 0 to 10, pass through 15, 30, 35, 80, and so on. And so I have seen that the Ghana government has started an online education platform. They call it what, iUniversity or iCampus. Okay. So I think that's a good place to start. Technology affords us opportunity to get the highest quality content developed by probably the best minds in any field or in every field, and put these on that iCampus platform, put it on the internet, put it on the platform so that students from everywhere in the country can access that. So, for example, if it is math, I know I'm a very good person in mathematics. I used to be I wrote math books in Ghana that many people used. So let's take that, for example. It's math, basic math. I write that curriculum with some people, we develop it. Put it on the internet. Well, of course, to be vetted to see whether it meets the, the quality that we want. Suppose it does, and it's put there. That one content can be made available to students everywhere in Ghana, so that in fact there is a level playing field that is being created, whether you are in my village in Kosibo, Chrome, in the Brongaf region, or you are in Cape Coast, where I went to school in St. Augustine's, or you are in Tamale, or you are in Ho or Accra, you have access to that quality education. Now, let's come to the technology. So in every system, we can find what works. If initially, every student doesn't have a laptop, we can actually have in that community college, that one community college, that big school or big classroom, we can have a screen, right, where the content is projected in that screen for 200 students to have access to. We can create in communities, right, a learning center or learning centers where students can go and have access to internet if everybody doesn't have internet in their own homes. So there are many things we can do. The thing is, it has to be the emphasis of the prevailing government. And the government may have to partner with the private sector. And the Ghanaians inside Ghana and outside Ghana, I mean, we are all going to chip in. How many of us in the US here buy laptops for our nieces and nephews and people? So I think the effort of all of us, I remember I sent 6 laptops to sell. I didn't sell it because, uncle, I need a laptop. Uncle, and I said, okay, give one to this person, give one to this person. And so the laptops were distributed. I think many people do this. So a partnership between the government and the private sector and all the citizens, the churches, the mosques, and so on, will go some ways to ensure that we move in the right direction.
All right, so I'm going to push further on this later on, but I think it would be good to have a conversation around where we start specifically, right. Because when you have so many holes to plug, the question becomes, which one do you start with? Okay. Or do you try everything at once? Yes, we have to build partnerships, but if we have partnerships, people still don't have access to data. There are people in communities where they have to pay school fees of, let's say, 80 cedis a term. And that is very expensive. They can't afford it. How do we ask them to, you know, how do they access data to be able to use for school? But let me park that as something we can return to later on.
All right. That was
now, one of the things that I think is important to talk about is the ecosystem. Conversations around education will be absolutely ineffective and not very useful if we can't talk about an ecosystem within which education exists. What are some of the key connections for you in this ecosystem? What are some of the key connections that we need to make between education and other areas, spheres of life within the context where we live?
Sure, that's a good question. We have addressed a few of that because education should not be addressed in a vacuum. One of the things I'll emphasize is ethics. For example, ethics education at all levels in Ghana, right from the kindergarten, of course, designed appropriately for the levels. So ethics is important. And the ecosystem of education when it comes to ethics should be commensurate with what is happening in society. If you teach ethics as theory, for example, when in fact in the civil area at companies or in companies, in government agencies and ministries, if there is a lot of unethical behavior that is not punished going on, that teaching of ethics in the schools will amount to nothing. It will be useless. So the teaching of ethics, for example, is very important, but we learn more by observation than by fiat. So you can't just teach the kids, do ethics, do this, when in fact they observe in society and they see that people are very unethical and they are not being punished. So it is important that what we do in the classroom is observed also in the industry and in government and so on. And so there is a need for the government, for parents, for teachers, for civil societies, for churches and mosques to all work together to ensure that what we do will succeed. So ethics is one important thing. Now, coming back to what you talked about, I think we can pilot, right? We can pilot these community colleges. We can maybe select 3 regions, okay? 3 or 4 regions in Ghana. I know University of Cape Coast, for example, has a lot of centers across the country. So turn some of these centers into community colleges, community technical colleges. So if one is located in the Brongafo region, for example, we know that agriculture is very important there. So emphasize agriculture processing and the manufacture of some small farm equipment, right? In the technology, in the technical school there, okay? Now, you select another region, let's say some place where there is, let's say Ashanti region or the Western region where we have gold, we have some minerals, then emphasize like turning the precious metals into some finished product, jewelry, manufacturing, or if it is bauxite, into alumina, so that we have people going to schools in places where they can learn something that is really readily applicable in those localities. Pilot 3 or 4 of them, and let's see how it works. And again, I'm saying that invariably it will call for a lot of investment. We can't run away from that. We can't run away. Just like if we want to build roads, we have to invest in road construction. In the same way, we want to build education, we have to invest in technology. You have to provide the internet, capabilities in many places. But of course, we can't do all at once. We need to start somewhere and increase or expand the coverage.
Thank you very much, Prof. What are some of the key sectors that if we're thinking of an ecosystem, we need to make sure we're connecting education to? You've alluded to agriculture.
Right.
Are there, let's say, two other key sectors or industries that you feel need to be connected, tied in an intentional way to education?
That's very important. I'm glad that you asked that. So agriculture is one of them. It should be tied very closely to our education so that when students go to these community colleges, they will learn food processing. They will learn how to manufacture small small farm equipment that are actually, beneficial to our society. So agriculture is one. Number two is government. Now, when I say government, this is what I mean. Whether it's a bad thing or a good thing, the fact is that the government is one of the largest employers in our society. So all these students who acquire the associate degree in technical skills, they need to be employed. The government will then have to make sure that in the procurement or in awarding contracts to companies, they will require that each company should have at least X number of electricians or plumbers or carpenters, depending on what the contract is. So that if you don't employ people with certificates in these areas, you're not going to get a contract. This will ensure that when students finish the technical schools with the appropriate skills, that there will be a conduit for them to get jobs in these companies, because the companies will have to employ them. This is how our skill gets used in the society. So there should be a good link between the jobs that the government gives out to companies and the hiring of these people who come out of these community colleges with that skill or with those skills.
Okay. So you've mentioned agriculture and employment when it comes to public projects.
Yes, please.
Right. How do we, if we take our focus back to the SDG we're talking about equity, equitable, good quality education.
Right.
How do we make this affordable? Whether we tout it as free or otherwise, somebody's got to pay for it.
Yes.
Because the resources and the investment, you mentioned investment, is necessary. So how do we pay for education that is of good quality, accessible, inclusive across Ghana?
That's okay. So again, we have to look at where we are right now and make some hard choices. Okay. Currently, not now, but from the time of independence until now, our emphasis has been on boarding school system. I went to St. Augustine's, a top school. So if the boarding school system were not available, probably I wouldn't have been able to go there. Or many people from other parts, different parts of the country would not have been able to come to Cape Coast to go to Augustine's or Fanspem or Adisadel or Wesley Girls or something like that, Holy Child and so on, or Prempe or Pokuwari and, Presec and Achimota. But now, while the boarding school system has its advantages, it brings people together, people from different ethnic groups, different tribes. We come together, we form friendships and so on. And that actually creates a lot of cohesion in the society, big benefit. However, it comes with a huge cost. And at some point, we have to analyze and determine if the costs really justify the benefits or vice versa. The benefits that we have, are they huge enough to really justify the cost that we incur? And could these benefits be obtained differently, in a less costly way? I would say it is possible that we will come out of this analysis with the conclusion that the boarding school system is just too costly for the nation. And that the amount of money we spend in the boarding school system could be used, most of it could be used to really create this inclusive access, where we emphasize schools, the community colleges in the localities all across the country, where people walk, they stay home and go to school and come back home because the schools are very close to their localities. If you really look at the cost of the boarding school, the brick and mortar buildings that we build, the dormitories that we house these students in, and all these things, if you factor in the cost, I think that cost can go a long way to provide high quality education to many people in their own localities, their own communities, without having to travel to Cape Coast or Accra or Kumasi to stay in a boarding school. The boarding school system, I think, is a very huge drain on the system, and I know it comes with benefits, but we have to analyze and see whether the benefits really justify the huge cost.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is save costs from boarding schools, and of course it would be important to look at what does it cost to actually run a boarding school, because many of them are actually underfunded.
Yes.
As in they lack what they need, and what they have is not enough. And so is there really a savings to be made there? And then of course you're talking about community colleges, we're looking at boarding school, we're looking at 2 phases. And so eliminating boarding schools in favor of, let's say, day schools may solve a problem for a segment, but then beyond there, perhaps we'll need to look at the numbers and also look at what needs to happen at the tertiary level to be able to accommodate some of the changes that you're suggesting. Let me ask just 2 more questions and then we'll be done. You've talked about changes that potentially, if they're successful, will have far-reaching transformational, impact. How do we build policy? Where do we start in terms of policy? I'm going back to this because we have a landscape, educational landscape, where you have Montessori schools, you have the public schools, you have different, schools dotting the landscape.
Right.
How do we engage policy such that whatever we're rolling out, whatever the changes are, the uptake or the adoption is actually far-reaching, so we can begin to see the benefits, the impact? How do we engage policymakers and people who are actually managing educational institutions, etc.? How do we build, what are some of the practical ways to build that conversation so that the policymakers are not speaking in their echo chamber, and
right.
then those who are managing institutions, running
right.
institutions, are also talking in their echo chamber? How do we deal with that?
So I think, like all things, there should be a discussion, right? We have to have a communication between government and all these entities, even parents, and all these providers of education at all levels. We need to just engage with them and discuss these things, because discussions may actually bring out some things that we haven't thought about, right? So we need to engage. But if you look at the system, what we are proposing is not very different in terms of actually the existence of these private schools and so on, because the JHS and the SHS and the primary schools, they still exist. They will still exist in this ecosystem, in this structure we're talking about. It's the community colleges, the emphasis on that. But still, if they know that their students are going to, a lot of them are going to aim at the community colleges, I think they will redesign their curriculum. And people will see the benefit very soon if we do it right. And the people who go to these community colleges and get their associate degree, they get jobs that are paying. And we need to move away from the system that says, oh, I have a university degree in geography or in history, and this person has a technical diploma. Why should the person be paid more than me? We need to move away from that. There are plumbers in the United States who make more money than I do as a professor. It doesn't matter. People choose what they want to do. If you want to be a plumber, go and learn plumbing. Because the thing is, when my water line is broken, I can't fix it. The person comes, he works here, he charges me $99 to walk into the house. And that is, it's a skilled, it's a skilled knowledge, skilled labor force, and so on, and you need to use them. So we need to move away from that. Soon, if this is implemented very well, the schools themselves will be forced to teach these things at the elementary level, to introduce their students to it, because they will know that's the place where the jobs are. They will be exporting themselves to Mali, to Niger, to Nigeria, to Burkina Faso, all these places with French and everything. And when anybody needs skilled builder, they will say, where are the Ghanaians? Where is the Ghanaian? I need a company that has the Ghanaians. And I left one thing out. There's one innovation that I think, depending on how we structure, we can do this. If you look at Ghana, I would say our most gifted young women and men should have a conduit, should have a place. And I propose, it may be a pie in the sky, but I propose a Ghana Academy of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. I call it, I have an acronym here. Let me just look at it and give the name. So apart from the emphasis on science, on French, I have the creation of that school. Let me get, what is the name? Okay. Ghana Academy of Mathematics, Engineering, Science and Technology. I call it Games and Tech. This is our version of MIT, IIT, the Caltech and so on. This is a school that I propose the government should think seriously about creating and put it not in Accra, somewhere in the middle of the country, maybe between Tamale and Sunyani, somewhere there. Put it there and get the most gifted of our young men and women into this university, very competitive university. And this is where our future skilled technologists, science people, those who find, they'll design the manufacture of, farm equipment, agri-processing equipment, pharmaceutical needs, building tech, the doctors, the highly skilled engineers. This is where we're going to produce these guys. Okay.
Okay. So I will take that and say your concept will be incomplete without the arts, because the arts and the humanities also fuel the thinking that goes into the sciences. Yes. So let's not leave that one out.
Exactly.
And my final question, when we talk about education, we're talking about young people for the most part.
Yes.
We haven't invested much in adult literacy programs, which is sad. But then to end with a focus on the young people that we're talking about, my question is, how do we engage young people in being co-creators and stewards of innovation? Because a lot of these conversations will happen amongst older people, policymakers, politicians, educators. How do we practically involve the voices of young people in education, so that they're not just consuming or they're not just recipients, but they're actually bringing their ideas into how we should structure and how we should engage? How do we engage young people?
Well, that's a good question. Focus groups may be part of it. Let's get some of these young people, select them, do a focus group and say, what do you want? How do you think the government or the nation, the society should work with you? Because part of what we should do in the community colleges, and I have it in my write-up here, is that we should teach our kids to be problem solvers, not chew, pour, and pass. They should think, and they should try to solve problems. I was talking to a young man who called me here and said, "Uncle, we don't have jobs." And I said, okay, so let's think about it. Where are you located? He says, I'm located somewhere in the Brong-Ahafo region. Fine. What do you produce there? There is a lot of food produced there, pepper. Sometimes in the lean season, there is no pepper in Accra. There is shortage of pepper in Accra and Kumasi. How about you use your education and buy pepper during the pepper season, dry the pepper, grind the pepper into ground pepper, bottle them and put labels on them. During the season when there is no pepper, get these to Accra and Kumasi and make a lot of money. And in the past, Ghanaians will say, oh, but uncle, I have a university degree. Why should I actually engage myself in pepper, drying and production? And that is one of our problems. We need to teach the kids to be entrepreneurs, people who really create businesses and not really be, just say I'm shy because I have a university degree, I shouldn't do this. That is alien to any advanced economy. The advanced countries don't do that. And we need to engage our young kids to solve the problems in the society and be rewarded financially for doing so. And I think if we emphasize that at all levels of our education, they will begin to get it.
Okay. All right, Professor Charles Appiah-Addo, this has been interesting, and I think the biggest takeaway from this conversation is the fact that there's so much to talk about.
Yes.
There's so much to do as a people, and a few highlights would be from what you said. One, we need to apply technology. We need to be intentional and apply technology across the educational system. You've also mentioned some structural changes with regard to how we progress. We're too focused on exams as the filter. And so to revisit this, you've also suggested that we look at community colleges and places where people can get vocational training that will equip them to actually create their own jobs. And so to also teach entrepreneurship, you've mentioned French. And in essence, what we're talking about is daring to question the status quo, and the magnitude of the challenges that we have also are magnified in terms of the opportunities that we have to do something about them. And so it's a conversation that I hope will continue, that people will pick up ideas from and be able to, move forward. And the one thing that will ultimately be important is looking at education as it sits in the context of an ecosystem. So manufacturing, agriculture, regular operations, wherever we find ourselves, how to make sure we tie all these to education and make sure that whatever changes we make are not just scratching the surface, but go deeper and last longer. Let me give you 30 seconds to give us your parting thought. What's the one thing, if nothing at all, that you'd like for people to walk away from this conversation with?
Thank you, Esi. We should make all our children to be fruitful members of our society. We should not rely on only those who finish university. Right from kindergarten, everybody who enters should be productive, a productive member of the society, whether they finish, high school or university or community colleges. And the way to do that is to really ensure that everybody is equipped to be productive and to really think, to be problem solvers. And we should not look at Ghana only as their milieu, the environment. We should expand to West Africa and to Africa. And that is why education in French and English is very important, but we should have that outward looking. And if we do that, we will create jobs, people will create jobs, and the standard of living of Ghanaians will be very high, will increase. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is Professor Charles Appiah-Addo. Thanks so much for joining us with the ideas that you've shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening to all those who have joined us and are listening. And thank you very much, Professor Appiah-Addo. Good to see you again. And you'll see a poll on your screen, everyone, and we'd love to know who's in here, who's in the room with us. So please go ahead and select which one applies to you the most, so we get a sense of the viewpoints that are represented in here. And while we do that, if you have any question, you can put that in the chat box as well. Thank you. Okay, so while we take our poll, okay, so we see we have government officials as the bulk of the people in the session, entrepreneurs, and the rest of us come from, a diverse background, civil society, etc., which is great because we really want to talk about a conversation amongst players in an ecosystem. Right, and so we need everybody's views in here. So, Prof, there are a few questions that have come up. I'm going to read a couple of them, some on this platform and a few ahead of the session. And I'd appreciate if we keep our responses very short and so we can cover as much ground. So there's a question that says, seemingly most innovations in education have focused on urban areas. Prior to the pandemic, conversations on computerization in education were mostly in the cities. The pandemic is increasing the inequality in education between the urban and rural and private and public schools. How do we bridge the digital divide? So 2 key questions. When it comes to access, what do we do? And when it comes to making sure that the digital resources are available, what do we do? So how do we bridge the digital divide?
Yeah. All right, thank you. I think we sort of alluded to these during the presentation, because as the questioner said, a lot of these things are really focused in the big cities. But what we are saying here right now is that Ghana should look outward into the rural areas, into the country, if you will. And I think the concept of community colleges will help in that regard. And again, we know that there is a lot of large disparity between the wealth levels of those in the cities and those in the rural areas, and that many of these people will not be able to afford a computer, a laptop. And sometimes that is why governments are there for. We also should really make use of our private citizens. I look at Ghana and I see that we are not making use of the wealthy people in our communities the way the West makes use of them. Philanthropy is not as prevalent in Ghana as it should be or it can be. There are many people who are wealthy in many places. If we really promote this idea of the wealthy helping the poor, there could be one person who could buy 1,000 laptops and distribute them to the students in this region. And I think this should be some of the focus of the members of parliament in the areas, the MCs or the DCs. They should get to know people in their communities and sell these ideas to them that the children in our places need help. And if it means naming a street after that person or naming a school building after that person, do it. This is what the US does. And so there are many ways. The government may not be able to do everything by itself. The government should definitely make it a priority. But private citizens can help too. And we need to go to them. We need to be ingenious in the way we approach them and make them partners of education. And so I think all these things, when we bring them together, we'll be able to provide the necessary equipment to the rural folks and the people who cannot afford them. In terms of the content, we also talked about the fact that if we have the iCampus and we develop a content that is very good, we should be able to disseminate the content to everybody. You know, if this really, the technology era affords us that opportunity, right? Where right now I'm teaching here. Today my students have exam here. That content can be made available. Some of my students are in Indonesia right now. They are in Indonesia and they're accessing the same thing. Why can't Ghanaians access the same content wherever they are in Ghana? Okay. They can make use of a lot of these.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. The other question that we have is linked to this. And this one says, are there innovations that provide services such as the internet and computers to deprived areas? And if they exist, how do countries have access to such innovations? And I'd give you just a second to talk about that. And then I'll mention a few local examples that we can learn from in terms of providing access. And later on, maybe beyond this conversation, we should talk about philanthropy, because wealthy people in our societies are also overburdened because of our extended family system and the pressures, we pile on them. So we have to be careful how we engage them. But please go ahead and comment on innovations, very specific innovations that you may know of that will still bring internet access, digital resources to rural communities, for example.
Okay, so thank you. The person mentioned laptops and computers. Now, one thing that I think we are not making use of adequately is the Ghanaians living outside their environment, outside where they come from in Ghana. They may be in Kumasi or Accra or in Europe, Canada, the US, and so on. I know many are helping, but I believe that if we structure things better or well, we can do a lot more than we are doing. Always there should be transfer, there should be thinking of an efficient transfer system. Now, I know that many communities in the United States, many Ghanaian communities have formed societies, communities. So those from, let's say, a district, there may be 100 of them or 200 of them in the US and 200 in the UK and Europe. If we have a well-structured system, we can supply laptops, say 1,000 laptops per year to these people. It may not be enough, but it may be a good start.
Okay.
So let's make use of all the people, right? So somebody is asking, is there innovation? That is a very simple innovation. Usually I want simple things that can be done. So let's make use of our citizens domiciled elsewhere and try to help. And you're talking about the wealthy people. Yes, we overburdened, but let's at least do something.
All right, thank you, Prof. And to answer that question, to add on to what you said, there are actually very innovative organizations in this country who are providing resources. And I'm not talking about providing just the physical resources. There's a local organization, for example, TechAid, that has a product called Asanka, where they actually have content, learning resources on devices which are not internet powered, which can be in any rural community. You attach to a computer and then people within a certain radius can access the information. It's just like being on the internet, but you're not. You know, so it's also useful to showcase some of the examples of what we ourselves as Ghanaians have created and have up and running in our local communities.
Thank you, that's good.
All right, so there's a question also on the future of jobs, that the future of jobs will mostly be in technology, and how do we align education? How do we reconcile taking skilled labor route? And I think we've addressed that quite a lot in terms of using technology so that we can, you know, fit into the world of work a lot more comfortably. So let me take a different question, which is really important. And this is from Akwesi Sapong, who's asking about inclusive education. What do we do for students and persons with disability?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that whatever we propose as innovations are inclusive enough and innovative to their benefit or for their benefits?
Yeah, that's a good question. The number one thing is there must be something in our hearts. There must be something in us that says that these people with disabilities are as important as those of us without disabilities. It may take a lot more to meet their needs than it will take to meet my needs. But if we recognize that these people should also be productive members of our society, then that is the first step to ensuring that we will do all that we need to do to make provisions for them. Just this morning, as I told you, my students are taking an exam. In the United States, students who have disabilities, they have a special office for them. And I get letters from the office that say this student needs 1.5 times the other students, what the other students need to take exam. Some of them need double. So it's 1.5 or double. And immediately they do that. If I'm giving the regular students 2 hours, these students will get 3 hours or 4 hours to take the same exam. So I think this is just an example, but I think that the society has to recognize, we have to recognize that these people are also members of our society and they should be productive. And and they can do, look at some people without even arms are able to write with their legs, but we need to support them. We need to provide them with all that they need for them to succeed. But I know that when we're growing up, it's like, oh, you just push the person aside. It's these people, they can't do anything. You know, they are dumb, they are this. We need to be modern in our approach to things. And if we are not deliberate in this, we can't do it. But that's my answer. We can help
What
them.
you're saying is the onus also lies on institutions to make the necessary arrangements to accommodate and support people with disability. All right. There's a question, more like a comment, about scaling up, and this is from Mr. Charles Boama, and who says there's already the AIMS, the Africa Institute of Mathematical Sciences, designed to do some of the things you're suggesting. So why not just scale it up? Why don't we look at what exists around us and then scale up? Could you share maybe 2 specific examples of institutions doing things that we can scale as opposed to starting afresh? If you have any specific examples that come to mind.
Yeah, I don't know what the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, what they're doing, but if they're doing what we say needs to be done, then definitely we should help them, right? We should help them scale up. And I have in mind the Indian Institute of Technology. If you look at the technological development of India in the last 50 years or so, you will see that both of them are coming from the IITs of India. If you look at the US, MIT is a very important school and other schools like that. I think Africa needs to think about all sectors of our educational system, and creating a school like the African Mathematical Institute of Mathematical Sciences and actually sponsoring that school, actually sort of dedicating resources to that school, providing them with the professors and making sure that it's competitive to get in. I'm focusing on that because these are the people who should design our equipment. We should, I mean, you look at the country, I remember there was a time I wrote to the Nigerian president and I saw this same idea, names, I call it name, Nigerian Academy of Mathematics, Engineering and Sciences. Put it near Abuja. Look, Nigeria should be creating, manufacturing cars and computers and so on and selling. Ghana can do the same thing. But the thing is, somebody said, why are we exporting cocoa at this time? I mean, look, if we create this educational system that we're talking about, we should have entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, women and men in our society, turning cocoa into chocolate and into other products. Which we shouldn't, at this time, we shouldn't be exporting cocoa beans. And we get only 2% of the profit. When Switzerland, that doesn't have any cocoa, gets about 90%. I mean, what kind of thing is that? We keep talking about it, but we are not doing much about it. It's time to act.
Okay.
Thank you.
There are a couple of comments that are linked to our educational system and the role of exams. And so on one hand, we're talking about, you mentioned ethics earlier on in our conversation, and teachers who are helping students to pass their exams, parents who are also buying for the awards. There's a question about how do we move away from judging students' performance based on exams? How do we, if you teach as a teacher, you want to know whether they've gotten the understanding and whether they can apply it. So how do we begin to do that and move away from exams as the sole or the major way of assessing a student's ability to, or a student's understanding and ability to apply what we've taught? Okay.
Assessment is always important. I think it's the nature of the assessment that is in question here. In the past, because everybody is focusing on getting to a 4-year university and doing a liberal arts degree or becoming an engineer or doctor or pharmacist or lawyer, everybody is focusing on that. And so exams became too important. Okay. Assessments are important, but if we shift the focus to what we're discussing right now, then somebody who knows how to really use his hands to do something will be assessed appropriately. Okay. He may not pass the English test, but he'll be able to build, he'll be able to manufacture bricks and do those things, and that assessment will be appropriate for that person. And so you will see that this pressure on parents to ensure that everybody gets to that 4-year university will go down. That pressure will decrease. And so I think that there are a lot of things that we can do together. But again, also, I'm saying that it's unfortunate that we are seeing students and parents behaving this way, but they are not behaving this way in a vacuum. If government and all of us don't work together to ensure that what is unethical is punished in our society and what is ethical is rewarded, we can't do these things as a solution. The whole society will become chaotic. Okay. So I say the real gold in Ghana is not the gold under the ground. It is Ghanaians for orderliness, leadership, and development. GOLD. It's our own development, how we create an orderly society with strong leadership and development agenda. That is the real goal, not the one on the ground. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, just a summary of some of the comments we received. We're getting comments about this starting from the mindset. So it's a mindset shift that we need to begin, a journey we need to begin. And then also the comment about great ideas, but then execution has often been a challenge. So how to execute. Prof, let me challenge you, and this is a real challenge. I want one word. One word you want us to go away buzzing in our heads. So when we wake up tomorrow morning, a word that we're thinking of. One word, not a sentence, but one word.
One word. Wow.
Yes.
Well, you say innovation, so I'll say innovation.
Innovation.
Let's change. Change.
Thank you.
So embrace change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof. It's been a wonderful session, and I will hand over to Jerry. Over to you, Jerry.
I've enjoyed it too. Thank you.
For that.